Welcome to the deep dive. Our mission here is to take a focused stack of sources, in-depth research articles, specific essays, and really unpack them so you can walk away feeling truly informed and, well, spiritually nourished.
And today we are embarking on a deep, thoughtful exploration of a really pivotal, yet I think often overlooked passage. 2 Kings chapter 3. This is the dramatic account of the prophet Elisha intervening in this massive military campaign. You've got 3 kings, and they're facing total annihilation in the desert.
And the essay our sources have provided treats this passage as, well, not just ancient history, but as a rich, timeless source of spiritual truth. It's almost like a blueprint for understanding God's character.
It is.
Especially his unwavering faithfulness to his promises,
Yeah.
even when his people are, profoundly compromised.
That's precisely right. Our mission in this deep dive is to really dissect the desperation of that moment, the lack of water, the fear of death, and to extract the key spiritual truths that are embedded in this account of divine intervention. We want to see how the constancy of God's covenant promises provides stability even in the face of human failure.
The cast of characters is striking right from the start.
Right.
Our sources really highlight the complexity of this alliance. We have apostate Israel, led by King Jehoram. We have faithful but politically compromising Judah,
Right.
led by King Jehoshaphat.
Right.
And then there's the king of Edom, a third, maybe even reluctant participant.
And what's immediately clear from the text is this massive contradiction. They begin with such confident plans, united military strength, every expectation of an easy victory.
Yeah.
But within just a matter of days, that human confidence it completely evaporates. It dissolves into utter despair when they find themselves trapped and waterless in the arid wilderness.
And the central lesson, which I think is the framework for a whole discussion, is just vital. It's that God's intervention, ultimately, is never earned by human merit or military strength.
No.
It flows entirely from his character, his sovereignty, and his eternal plan. Specifically, those promises he made to Israel centuries before.
And this is where the dispensational perspective that our source material uses becomes so key. It's a framework that helps us understand that God is operating according to his established covenants, his overarching program for the nation of Israel.
Right.
So our mission today is to illustrate God's continued preserving dealings with Israel, even though the nation was politically split, Israel versus Judah, and both sides were in, various stages of spiritual decline. God's plan stands firm,
Regardless of the people involved.
regardless of the momentary faithfulness of the individuals involved.
It's a powerful setup. Let's begin by grounding ourselves in the specifics. I think we really need to understand the true severity of both the spiritual compromise that set the stage and the physical danger these armies were facing.
We have to first look closely at the spiritual condition of these allied kings because their moral status, it directly influences Elisha's reaction later on.
Okay, so let's start with Jehoram of Israel. He's the son of Ahab and Jezebel, which is, that's quite a legacy to overcome. Our source material notes that he made some small, sort of surface-level improvements.
He did. He removed a standing stone or a pillar that was associated with Baal worship.
But how deep did that reform really go?
Unfortunately, not deep at all. It was cosmetic. The text states clearly that Jehoram continued in the idolatrous practices initiated by Jeroboam.
And that's a crucial distinction, isn't it? That goes back centuries.
It does. Jeroboam was the first king of the northern kingdom, and to prevent his people from returning to Jerusalem for worship, he set up state-sanctioned idolatry, the golden calves in Bethel and Dan.
So even though Jehoram gets rid of the obvious recent Baal symbols, he's maintaining the fundamental systemic spiritual darkness. That golden calf worship was still the core of the Northern Kingdom's religion.
Exactly. He was still leading the people away from the true worship of Yahweh. The spiritual foundation of Israel remained corrupt.
Now, if we look south to Judah, you have a completely different story with King Jehoshaphat. He's presented pretty consistently as a godly man who sought to walk in the ways of the Lord.
His personal devotion was genuine, absolutely. He was committed to serving God and upholding the law.
And this is where the narrative becomes so tragically complex. Our sources point out that while he was personally devout, his record was significantly marred by these repeated, politically driven compromises.
Specifically through ill-advised alliances with the wicked kings of Israel.
And he had learned this lesson the hard way already. The force reminds us of his near-fatal alliance with Ahab, Jehoram's father.
That's right.
An alliance that nearly cost Jehoshaphat his life in battle. And yet here he is again, drawn into a joint military effort. with Ahab's son.
It's baffling.
It really is. And it raises this profound question that I think a lot of us struggle with when we read this text. If Jehoshaphat was truly a godly man, and if he had experienced the disastrous consequences of partnering with Ahab before, why did he repeat this grave mistake with Jehoram? What was the spiritual blind spot?
Well, I think our material gives us a necessary lens here. It seems to be a failure to prioritize spiritual separation over political expediency.
Ah,
Jehoshaphat looked at the situation and he saw a need for military strength, political stability, and, economic recovery. He prioritized the immediate practical benefit of a coalition over the clear spiritual danger of partnering with those who openly rejected God.
so he was just doing the math in his head.
Yeah.
A wicked ally is better than no ally when facing an enemy like Moab. He substituted trust in a strong military coalition for complete reliance on God alone.
That's the danger. And the compromise didn't instantly turn Jehoshaphat into an idolater, of course not. But it did expose him to unnecessary peril, and it risked muddying his spiritual convictions. The lesson for us is huge. Even the most devoted people can allow political or financial or social prudence to entirely override fundamental spiritual wisdom. And that act in itself invites trouble.
Okay, let's shift to the political and military background then. What specifically motivated this massive three-kingdom alliance, and why on earth did they choose such a treacherous route?
The primary motivation was, well, it was straightforward: money and power. Moab, which is located east of the Dead Sea, had been subject to Israel for a long time, forced to pay tribute.
And our source material says this was a substantial tribute.
Oh, it was! 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. This was a significant economic stream for the kingdom of Israel.
So when Ahab died, King Mesha of Moab saw his chance to declare independence. That rebellion was a direct economic hit and a political insult to Jehoram.
Exactly. Jehoram had to crush that revolt immediately, not just for pride, but to restore the kingdom's finances. So he sought the alliance, getting Judah and Edom on board.
And Edom was sort of obligated to join.
Most likely, yes. At this time, the king of Edom was appointed by the king of Judah, so he was subject to the alliance. And this created a formidable three-pronged military force.
But then we get to the strategic decision that becomes the source of their whole crisis. Instead of taking the direct route across the Jordan, they chose to attack Moab from the south, traveling through the arid wilderness of Edom. Why?
Well, military historians suggest this was intended as a surprise flanking maneuver. Moab would naturally fortify its northern border near the Dead Sea.
Of course.
So by taking the long way around, a march that would take 7 days through the deep desert, they hoped to hit Moab from its vulnerable, undefended southern flank. It sounded brilliant on paper.
But in execution, it quickly became a complete disaster. The source material really emphasizes the massive risk they took by choosing the arid wilderness of Edom for a 7-day march.
The logistics of ancient warfare in the desert, they're almost impossible for us to comprehend today. Imagine a combined force of 3 armies, thousands of men, horses, donkeys, supply animals. Every single one of them needs water daily. You have to carry 7 days worth of water plus a reserve, or you have to find it along the way. And when the supplies ran out or the expected wells were dry, the entire operation instantly became suicidal.
The text says that after that 7-day march, they faced a dire crisis.
Oh.
This wasn't just discomfort, it was impending doom.
And we really need to just sit in the horror of that moment for a second. In the ancient Near East, water wasn't a convenience. It was the ultimate prerequisite for life and for military function. Without it, the men were facing dehydration, heat stroke, delirium, and eventually death. Their powerful alliance, their clever strategy, their economic objective, all of it was nullified by simple thirst. They went from the height of military confidence to facing total annihilation in less than a week.
Yeah.
The danger was existential.
This total breakdown, it really sets the stage for the next phase of the narrative, where the king's desperation reveals their true spiritual colors. Their responses to this life or death crisis just could not be more different.
They reveal exactly where each king's trust truly lay. And Jehoram, the idolatrous king of Israel, he immediately spirals into cynicism and panic.
Right, he didn't seek divine counsel, he just started blaming. Our sources note he blamed the Lord for their plight, viewing God not as a covenant-keeping father, but as some sort of malicious conspirator.
That is a profound indictment of his spiritual state. Jehoram's worldview meant that if his human plans succeeded, he took the credit. If they failed, he saw God as actively plotting against him.
He actually cries out, "Alas, the Lord has called these three kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab."
It's unbelievable. He didn't see God as a provider or a preserver. He saw God as the enemy setting a trap.
Which really highlights that he had no genuine personal knowledge of Yahweh's character. He only knew how to blame God when reality contradicted his own expectations.
Exactly. Now contrast that with Jehoshaphat's response. He didn't panic and he didn't curse.
No.
Instead, he sought divine guidance. He asks, "Is there no prophet of the Lord here, through whom we may inquire of the Lord?"
So even though he'd compromised his position by joining the alliance in the first place, in the moment of true crisis, his reliance returned to its proper source. He knew where the ultimate authority and provision rested.
And that's the difference between apostasy and a sincere, if flawed, faith. When the political solution, the alliance, and the strategic solution, the route failed, Jehoram collapsed into despair and bitterness.
Right.
Jehoshaphat, despite his poor judgment in forming the coalition, immediately turned to the prophetic word. He recognized that only God could solve a problem that defied all natural and human solutions.
So this inquiry leads them to the prophet Elisha. And Elisha's reception of the wicked king of Israel is, well, it's notoriously chilly. The text describes it as anything but warm.
It's a moment of severe confrontation. Elisha's immediate reaction is pure sarcasm, and it's calculated to expose Jehoram's hypocrisy.
He tells him to go seek counsel from the false prophets of his parents, Ahab and Jezebel.
He does. It's a clear declaration. Why are you coming to the true God now when you honor false gods every other day?
He basically dismisses the wicked king entirely. So the crucial question then is, why did Elisha eventually agree to speak the word of the Lord, and in doing so, save the apostate king of Israel and his army?
The text gives us the stunning answer, which is really a linchpin for the entire theological interpretation of this story. Elisha agreed to speak not for Jehoram's sake, but because of Jehoshaphat's presence.
Wow.
The prophet ignores the petition of the wicked king of Israel and responds purely out of reverence and respect for the godly, though compromised, king of Judah.
And this is more than just personal favoritism, isn't it? Our source material emphasizes that this action reflects God's faithfulness to the covenant he made with David.
Absolutely. This is the heart of the matter. God had promised David an everlasting dynasty, and a part of that promise involved the preservation of Judah. So even when Jehoshaphat, the Davidic king, was making foolish, compromising decisions that put his life and his kingdom in jeopardy,
God intervened.
God intervened to ensure the survival of Judah. The deliverance was not deserved by Jehoram, nor was it earned by Jehoshaphat's good intentions. It was guaranteed by God's eternal, unconditional promise to David.
So God's plan, his grand eternal covenant purpose, it transcends and overrules the momentary failures, the weaknesses, and even the deliberate idolatry of the human players involved.
Now, once Elisha agrees to speak, he doesn't just jump straight into the prophecy. He calls for a musician. He notes that, as the music played, the hand of the Lord came upon him.
That moment is fascinating. It shows the necessity of preparing the spiritual vessel, right?
Yeah.
Creating an environment of peace, of focused worship, to move away from the noise of military panic and despair.
Yes, it's a tuning of the heart. Elisha had to shut out the demands of these three panicked kings and align himself with the still, small voice of God. And once he does, the message he delivers is truly baffling to the desperate men around him.
The divine command just seems completely counterintuitive to their dire physical reality. Elisha promises the valley will be filled with water, but he explicitly says it will happen with no wind or rain. And the instruction given to the armies was, dig ditches in the dry ground.
And this command is really where the rubber meets the road concerning faith and obedience. The soldiers were completely depleted, dehydrated, demoralized, surrounded by dust, heat, and death. And their prophet tells them, get to work, start digging trenches.
It required a massive act of faith, not just belief, but labor, to prepare for a miracle that defied every expectation of natural law. They weren't asked to pray for clouds or look for a spring. They were asked to prepare a physical container for an invisible supernatural supply.
Just think about the psychological difficulty of that command. Every rational part of their minds must have been screaming, why are we wasting our last strength digging empty holes in this dust? But their obedience meant they were acting in anticipation of a provision they could not yet see or hear or feel approaching.
And the provision arrived precisely on time, which adds another layer of spiritual significance.
It did. The next morning, at the time of the morning sacrifice, the water began to flow into the valley. Our sources emphasize that the water flowed mysteriously from the direction of Edom, an unseen, underground source, filling the trenches they had dug and supplying the men and animals.
And the timing, the morning sacrifice.
The timing points to the fact that this was an act of God responding to worship and covenant rhythm, not just some random event.
But the miracle didn't stop at quenching their thirst. The strategic genius of God is revealed in how the water was immediately weaponized against the enemy.
This is truly masterful divine strategy. It shows how God works on multiple levels simultaneously. The very thing that saved the allied armies was then used to deceive and defeat Moab.
So when the Moabites woke up, they looked across the valley. Our source material explains that because of the red clay common in that region and the angle of the early morning sun, the precise moment the water arrived, it caused the water in the valley to appear glistening red.
The visual effect was powerful and confusing. The Moabites, looking from their high vantage point, mistook the sight for a colossal pool of blood, and they jumped to a fatal and arrogant conclusion.
And what was the logic behind their mistake?
They believed that such a massive three-army alliance, Israel, Judah, and Edom, had just inevitably turned on itself. They assumed the political and religious differences had erupted into infighting, resulting in a bloodbath.
So their thought process was, they've killed each other, let's go get the loot.
Basically, yes. These kings have surely attacked and slaughtered one another. Now all we need to do is rush in to plunder the camp and claim the spoils.
And that arrogant assumption led directly to their downfall. They rushed into the camp, completely unprepared for a battle.
Only to be ambushed and defeated by the very armies they thought were dead. It is the perfect demonstration of God's sovereignty. He didn't just solve the crisis of thirst, he turned the instrument of provision, the water, the trenches, the morning light, into the instrument of victory. He confounded the enemy through their own preconceived notions.
All right, let's transition now. We'll move into section 3 to unpack the deeper theological why behind this whole narrative. I think we need to focus heavily on the implications of covenant, sovereignty, and the power structure God reveals here.
The most immediate and profound truth is the concept of God's irrevocable covenant faithfulness. This event perfectly encapsulates it.
The survival of the armies proves that God's covenant commitment overruled the folly of human alliances. I mean, Jehoshaphat was in the wrong place, with the wrong people, for the wrong reasons, and yet he was protected.
He was. The text makes it explicitly clear that the deliverance was granted for David's sake. This is the foundational point for our understanding of God's relationship with Israel. The Davidic covenant, which was established back in 2 Samuel 7, promised that David's line and kingdom would be preserved forever, ultimately leading to the Messiah.
So even if the current king of Judah, Jehoshaphat, acted foolishly by aligning himself with idolaters, God cannot allow the destruction of the kingdom of Judah.
Correct.
Because that would break the messianic line, which is impossible.
Precisely.
Yeah.
This underscores that God's promises to Israel are absolutely irrevocable. They are not conditional on the worthiness or the moral perfection of the human leaders. The promises are rooted entirely in God's own unchanging character and his ultimate redemptive purposes. And this gives immense stability to the entire biblical narrative. It reassures us that God's plan will be accomplished regardless of human weakness.
That insight really is an immense comfort. The foundation of the entire relationship, the entire plan, it rests on him, not on our often compromised performance.
And secondly, the entire account is a powerful reminder of God's absolute sovereignty over both nature and history.
The evidence for this is the unseen provision. The water arrived without any natural meteorological cause, no wind, no rain. It was pure, raw, miraculous intervention that just defied the laws of the desert.
And this act fits a clear biblical pattern. Our material connects this back historically to the previous provision of water from the rock during Moses' day. The pattern is clear. When his people are in a barren wilderness, facing a life or death crisis, God provides life-sustaining water through supernatural means.
And by doing that, he demonstrates his unique power as the creator.
That's right.
So if we connect this historical pattern to the bigger picture, the source suggests that this provision of water is actually pointing forward to Christ.
Yes. Jesus Christ identifies himself as the true living water who satisfies the deepest spiritual thirst of the soul. But in the context of our dispensational framework, the connection extends prophetically. This miracle looks ahead to the messianic kingdom yet to come.
Okay.
When Christ reigns, God will again provide miraculously for his people, bringing ultimate refreshment and life to Israel and the world, fulfilling those promises of streams in the desert we see in places like Isaiah 35.
So the physical miracle here is a perfect object lesson for the spiritual reality to come.
Now, let's spend some significant time on the central command of the story. digging the ditches. This moves us from theology to immediate application, the timeless lesson in faith, or what we might call the preparation principle.
I find this the most practically challenging aspect of the story. The core principle is that the armies had to prepare to receive the miracle before they saw any physical sign of provision. They had to act in faith, using their last ounces of strength.
The core demand is simple: trust and obedience. We are called to trust and obey even when the means of God's provision is not yet visible. They were asked to labor in the dry dust, acting as if the blessing was certain, even when every circumstance screamed that they were fools.
It just flips the expected order. We want to see the rain first, then we'll prepare the container. God requires the preparation first.
Yeah.
So what exactly does this labor, this digging ditches, represent for the armies in that moment?
For them, it represented full commitment. It was a complete surrender to the prophet's word, regardless of the logic. It was a demonstration of faith that wasn't passive belief, but active, physical labor in anticipation of God doing the impossible.
Wow.
They had to reject their cynical despair and replace it with physical effort rooted in hope.
And our source material also draws a prophetic parallel to this principle, looking forward to Israel's ultimate restoration.
Absolutely. The source explains how this preparation principle is echoed in future prophetic terms. Israel will one day be called to prepare for the unprecedented, guaranteed blessings of the kingdom, the abundance, the restoration, even while they are in the midst of national drought and spiritual dryness, just prior to the Messiah's return.
So the readiness of the people is the human response to the certainty of God's promise.
It is.
Finally, within this theological section, we have to look again at how God orchestrated the complete victory.
It's humbling. God needs no sophisticated weapon or complex strategy. The fact that the Lord could turn the glistening red water, a simple physical element meant to sustain life, into an instrument of mass misperception and military victory shows his complete control over every facet of the plan.
Including the subjective assumptions of his enemies.
Including those. It's amazing how God used the Moabites' own arrogance, their assumption that the kings must have slaughtered each other, as the precise means of their defeat. It perfectly foreshadows future deliverances. It assures the believer that God works behind the scenes, using unforeseen circumstances, miscalculations by the enemy, and simple elements to accomplish his purpose and protect his people. In the final summation of history, God will confound Israel's enemies, turning their own assumptions into their downfall. His plan is comprehensive, touching both the physical miracle and the psychological defeat of the adversary.
Now we can move into section 4, the application phase. We take these deep historical and theological truths, covenant, sovereignty, preparation, and ask, how do they inform the daily lives of contemporary believers, those of us who might be struggling through our own dry seasons?
We begin with the most immediate warning presented by Jehoshaphat: the danger of ungodly alliances.
Our sources use his repeated errors as a crystal clear warning sign. His agreement to join Jehoram was a choice of expediency. It provided a quick military fix, but was spiritually toxic.
Right, because it required proximity to an idolater. The lesson is vital. Alliances or partnerships built on expediency rather than godliness often lead to trouble.
Yeah.
Partnership with those who actively reject God's ways invites spiritual danger, even if we are eventually mercifully delivered from the physical consequences, as Jehoshaphat was. The compromise itself is the spiritual wound.
Let's make this concrete. What does an expedient alliance look like for a thoughtful believer in the modern world? I mean, we are constantly bombarded with opportunities to partner or compromise.
We can break it down into several crucial areas, moving beyond the obvious military one. First, you have business and finance.
Okay.
This often looks like partnering with someone purely because they are ruthless or highly profitable, while ignoring their demonstrated lack of integrity, ethics, or moral character. We choose the quick financial gain over the long-term cost of spiritual alignment.
I see.
Second, marriage and relationships. This is Jehoshaphat's error on a personal covenant level. It's choosing a spouse who is expedient, maybe they're financially secure or socially powerful, but who does not share your devotion to God, believing your own spirituality will be sufficient to overcome that misalignment.
Right.
Third, political alignment. This involves prioritizing a specific political outcome or ideology so highly that you're willing to compromise core biblical ethics or ally with groups whose fundamental worldview actively undermines scriptural truth just because they promise short-term political success.
That's a powerful contemporary challenge, especially in our polarized climate. We have to constantly assess whether our political partnerships are rooted in a shared reverence for God's truth or just temporary convenience.
Absolutely. Fourth, we see this in social circles and media consumption. We might align ourselves with cynical, worldly, or even destructive cultural narratives just to gain acceptance or social comfort, or to appear relevant, thereby inviting spiritual danger into our inner world.
Through compromised influences.
Exactly. And fifth, educational decisions. Choosing an institution or a course of study based purely on its perceived prestige or economic promise, even if we know the environment actively promotes philosophies hostile to faith, with the assumption that our own faith is strong enough to resist the constant pressure.
So the point of all these examples is that while God might mercifully deliver us, as he did Jehoshaphat, we put ourselves into a spiritually compromising situation that we were warned against.
That's it exactly.
The second major application, then, concerns the nature of God's provision itself. The kings were looking for natural signs, rain, or stream. God supplied water from an entirely unseen, unexpected source.
This is enormous reassurance for us in moments of anxiety or lack. When we face need, financial, relational, health-related, we naturally try to dictate to God how he should intervene. We look for the expected stream, the promotion, the easy human fix.
We limit God based on our own imagination.
We do. But this narrative demands that we remember that God may meet our needs in ways we could never predict. His resources are absolutely limitless, and they often come from directions we never anticipated, through means that defy natural expectation. The focus shifts entirely from the method of provision to the certainty of the provider.
So don't focus on how he will deliver, only on the fact that he will.
That's it.
And this brings us full circle to the contemporary call to action drawn from 2 Kings 3, the call to prepare in faith.
The ditches were dug in barren ground without any empirical evidence that water was coming. This teaches us that in our spiritual walk, obedience often precedes the visible blessing.
So what does digging ditches look like for the believer today? It's not physical labor in the dust, but spiritual and psychological effort in the absence of feeling.
It is the requirement of effort in barren seasons. It means we are called to labor, pray, and trust in barren seasons, even when our spiritual efforts seem dry, pointless, or unproductive. We are not called to idleness while waiting for a miracle. We are called to prepare the vessel.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Digging ditches today might mean faithfully maintaining daily time in prayer and scripture study, even when you feel spiritually dry and uninspired. It might mean proactively forgiving a person who has wronged you, preparing the relational space for reconciliation, even before you see any sign of the other person softening. It might mean exercising financial discipline and stewardship, preparing a safe space for God's future provision, even while your circumstances are lean.
So our security rests in the knowledge that God, who is faithful to his promise, will surely send the supply to fill the preparations we have made. Our job is the preparation. His job is the provision.
It separates true faith from wishful thinking. Faith is active, it labors, it trusts, and it prepares the ground, secure in the knowledge that God's character guarantees the supply.
And finally, there is the enduring prophetic reassurance that this ancient history provides for those of us looking forward to God's ultimate plan.
Yes. For the thoughtful Christian listener, this event, God intervening for the sake of his covenant, reassures us that God's long-term program for Israel is still absolutely on track.
Right.
The same immovable covenant faithfulness that preserved the Davidic line and rescued Judah from annihilation in Elisha's day guarantees the future restoration of the nation under the Messiah's reign.
This gives us tremendous certainty about God's overall plan for human history, showing that the promises are non-negotiable and guaranteed.
Indeed. The ultimate water in the desert is coming when Christ returns. That will be the moment of ultimate fulfillment, bringing refreshing, life-giving water both physically and spiritually to Israel and to a world parched by sin, satisfying not just the needs of the moment, but the eternal need of all mankind. So in conclusion, our deep dive into 2 Kings 3 reveals the overwhelming mercy and sovereignty of God operating directly in the midst of human failure, compromise, and sheer despair. It underscores that God's covenant purposes, his unconditional promises to David and to Israel, stand utterly firm, regardless of the missteps of leaders like Jehoshaphat or the outright rebellion of Jehoram.
And the simple, powerful act of digging ditches in that dry valley remains our spiritual challenge today. Through that act of simple, difficult obedience, those armies witness God's profound power to provide and to deliver. The ultimate call for the believer is clear. Our security does not rest in the alliances we form, the military strength we possess, or our own perceived merit. It rests wholly and securely in the God who chose us and keeps his word. We are called to trust wholly in the Lord and to prepare in faith for his provision, knowing his word will never fail.
That leads us to the encouraging closing note found in our sources, drawn from the prophet Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 19. This passage echoes the powerful theme of God making provision in the most impossible circumstances. The verse says, "Behold, I will do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall ye not know it? I will even make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert."
What an incredible, comprehensive promise.
This passage is the ultimate encouragement for the person facing a desert season. The God who intervened mysteriously and miraculously in the desert for Jehoshaphat, sending water without rain, leading to victory without a human plan, is the same God who promises he will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert for you. He keeps every single word he has spoken, often in ways you cannot yet see or predict. May you hold tight to the certainty of his provision and find the strength to prepare in faith for the new thing he is ready to do in your life. Go in his peace and in the knowledge of his promised refreshment.